Hello, Honors Algebra 2 Trig students. Today we're going to be talking about AP style questions just to get you ready to answer these kinds of questions on your upcoming assessment. We're going to talk both about multiple choice questions and free response questions. So I'd like you to work in your homework packet instead of your notes packet because we're going to do some of the problems together and then you're going to finish the problems for homework. So make sure to do all of the problems we do today in your homework packet. So just like I've been emphasizing throughout this unit, it is extremely important to answer the appropriate question. Remember, if you solve for x, and x does not represent the question being asked, you're going to get the question wrong when you're dealing with multiple choice questions. So it's important to underline keywords, and also I recommend underlining the question that they are asking. So let's take a look at some examples. Take a minute and solve this problem. Press pause on your video, and when you're done, press play again for the answer. So here is my answer. And in this case, you truly were solving for x. So we are simplifying both sides of our equation. And once we get there, we move our x's to one side and our non-x's to the other. Surprisingly enough, I moved my x's right. I generally move them left. But then once I got here, I divided by 6 and I simplified my fraction. It's -3/2. And that is answer D. Many AP style questions that are multiple choice have this kind of setup where they give you 3 different choices and they ask you which of them is true, and your answers are things like this: 1 only, 2 and 3 only, etc. So you need to look at each of these and decide which ones apply. And as you go, you should eliminate choices that do not work. So let's take a look at, see what this says. Which of the following values is or are solutions to the equation? So in order to be a solution, you have to, when you put in the value, it has to make a true statement. So what I would do is take this and plug in. Alternatively, we could just simply solve this. And I think maybe because there are 3 choices, the easiest thing to do is solve that. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to simplify on both sides, distribute the 2, and continue to simplify by combining like terms. Now check this out. If I subtract 3x from both sides, the x's drop out and I get 14 equals 14. Now if you remember correctly, since this is a true statement, it means all x's will work. Any value of x that I put in is going to make this a true statement, which means option 1, 2, and 3 are solutions, and that's answer D. Now, if you had gone with my first suggestion and plugged in 3, you would have found that this equation was true and worked. And that's fine. You could go through each of these and do that. But if you stop and say, oh, that works, that's a solution, you get the problem wrong. The other thing is, if you did that approach and then you also plugged in -3 and found that worked, what you would have to realize is that for a linear equation, there's exactly one solution, unless, of course, there's no solution at all, or if there's infinitely many. So as soon as you would know that both 1 and 2 worked, you would automatically know that option 3 works. Next, give this one a try. Press pause on your video. When you're ready for the answer, press play again. Now notice that I have underlined as I went. It says a freight ship left the port of New Orleans 7 hours before a cruise ship. So I have a freight ship and a cruise ship. The ships traveled in opposite directions, and lots of times I like drawing it just so I can see it a little bit better. So opposite directions. One's going that way, one's going that way. The cruise ship traveled 27 miles per hour and the freight ship traveled 30 miles per hour. That makes it easy to plug in. How long has the freight ship been traveling when they are 381 miles apart? Now, I waited to fill in the time because I wanted to be sure that when I solved for my variable, I was getting the answer. Don't have to do that, but if you don't, you're going to have to go back and plug in, and it's really easy to make a mistake. So, seeing that I needed to know how long the freight ship had been traveling, I made that my variable t, and then I went back and I said, okay, the freight ship left 7 hours before. So the freight ship has been traveling longer because it started off before the cruise ship. So the cruise ship's been traveling 7 hours less. So then I used my formula, distance equals rate times time, and I got here. And the fact that I drew this makes it easier to see what I'm looking for is where the sum of them is 381 miles apart. So adding these together, it has to be equal to 381. And when you solve it, you should get t equals 10. And that's my answer. If you had set it up where the cruise ship was the variable, what would have happened is you would have found that you solved and you got 10 minus 7, or 4, which would have been 3. So looking at this, I know that the cruise ship has been traveling 10 minus 7, or 3 hours. The freight train has been traveling 10 hours. Now, I want you to notice that 3 is a choice. So if you chose to make this your variable and got 3 as a solution, you have to remember to plug back in over here. So this would have said, so let's say you made that your variable. This would have been a plus 7. And you would have gotten 3. You would have plugged back in and found that this actually is 10, and you finish your answer there. Either way is appropriate. What's important is that you remember that what the question is that you're answering. So you got to be certain on that. Why don't you give this one a try? I want you to know that the way they have drawn these number lines, do you see the square bracket there? Sometimes you'll see number lines drawn that way. What that indicates is that's a closed circle. So all of these are closed circles. On the other hand, if it had been curved, it would have meant that it was open, but all of these are closed. So give this one a try, press pause on your video, and when you're ready for the answer, press play again. Here's my answer. You'll notice that I got x is less than or equal to -2. I don't know why I drew that as an open circle. And x is greater than or equal to -4 that way. Now, since it's or, I'm looking for one where one or both are true, and that's the entire number line. That's answer A. If it had been and, it would have only been in here, and you'll notice that's answer C. So you have to be very careful, watch for keywords. We are going to leave number 5 for homework. The next type of AP question that I would like you to see are free response questions. So for free response questions, you need to be very, very careful and read for details, because everything they ask you for, you must provide. Otherwise, you end up losing points. So free response questions in the AP mathematics world are always 9 points, usually divided into 2 to 4 different parts. The points available to earn a total of 9. So we're going to work together through a couple free response questions and see what they are like. I would like for you to try all of free response number 2. Remember, look for the information they're requesting and make sure you address it. Make sure you write in full sentences. And only answer what they ask. Don't add extra information that may be wrong. Press pause on your video. When you're ready to go through the answers, press play again. Okay, let's take a look at part A. So it says solve the equation, show all of your work. That's pretty self-explanatory. Remember, showing your work means every line is equal to the line prior and you only make one change at a time. So a sample rubric for my grading is organized like this. So you get a point if you correctly distribute the -2. So I have to see that that happens. So you'll notice that's my first line here. And then you get another point for correctly solving the equation after distributing. And then you get if you have the right answer. So you can see my work here. I find that x equals -1/6. This is the kind of response I'm looking for part B. It says, suppose after solving an equation, a student ends up with the final equation 0 equals -3. How many solutions does the equation have? Explain your reasoning. So if you just say there's no real solution, you're not going to get all the points. The explain part matters. So you have to say if the equation 0 equals -3 is the final equation, then all the variables completely canceled out of the equation. When this happens, there is no value of the variable that makes the equation true, because 0 can never equal -3. So far 2 points. Therefore, there is no solution to the equation. That's 1. So I need to see all 3 parts in order for you to get all 3 points. Finally, part C. Give an example of a complex equation that has infinitely many or all real number solutions. Make sure that the equation is complex, meaning that there are variables on both sides and the distributive property must be applied at least once. Then solve the equation and explain why your solution shows that the solution is all real numbers. Okay, so what I did was I started with the end in mind. So I decided I'd pick 2 numbers that are equal and work backwards. So to this, I added 2x on both sides because remember, I need my variables to cancel out. Then I decided, okay, I need the distributive property. So I separated -5 into -8 and 3 because these 2 numbers sum to -5. And then I separated 3x minus x so that it was 2x. So I separated the 2x and made it 3x minus x, and that allowed me to factor out a 2 from these 2 terms and factor out a negative from these 2 terms. So now I have my nice complex equation that I can solve this way and get -5 equals -5. And since -5 is always equal to -5, the solution is all real numbers. So now let's look at how it would be graded. The equation is complex with variables on both sides. Yep. So they give me this sample equation here. Could have been another, just like what I did. The equation is complex, requiring the distributive property to be used at least once. I did twice. You don't have to do twice, but at least once. The equation is solved to show the final equation is 0 equals 0. I don't need for you to go to 0 equals 0, -5 equals -5 is just fine. Get a true statement without variables. And then finally, the solution is all real numbers because 0 always equals 0. Like I said, -5 always equals -5. Thus, any number for the variable will make the equation true. So we are going to leave free response questions 4 and 5 for homework. So I'd like you to work on your assignment now. I've summarized what your assignment is in Schoology. So tomorrow we will review some more and then have the quest. Have a great day.